Thank you and welcome back. Professor Tanabe.
Well, once again, like this morning, I think we were treated to a really clear, easy to understand talk about the real strengths of Jodo Shinshu in terms of its values in ways that are, again, easy to understand. No technical terms, no words that can't be translated like Shinjin. Why can't we have an English translation of Shinjin? Well, because it's not translatable. That's kind of hard to communicate when you're trying to talk to people and using language that cannot be put into English. So I think the way how Jeff put Jodo Shinshu is a really admirable way that makes it accessible to people. Don't you wish that we could send him to every temple so that he could give this talk? Because it goes, such a long way to making it understandable, even for people who have been exposed to it for years, making it understandable on very everyday, commonplace terms. I mean, how hard is it to understand trust? How hard is it to understand fearlessness and relax? You're talking to people who are experts at relaxing. This is Hawaii. The criticism we get is we're too relaxed, that we should be out there. Used to be called Polynesian paralysis, but I think we should now call it Pacific paralysis. That we're too laid back and easygoing. As you were describing it, I was thinking of my childhood in Waterloo. I thought, yeah, that's what we did, relax, trust. As my mother said, I don't care what you say, but you better say thank you. And so always say thank you. And so again, put in really commonplace terms. Now, the little bit of the downside of that, I think, is that it's maybe too positive. That the experiences that the kind of experience in which all of this makes sense, and several of your examples were experiences of this, is the experience of helplessness. I can't do anything about my son who's now in the operating room, not much I can do. I'm in the ocean, I can only, paddle for so long, I should just relax. I mean, there are a lot of times when we do experience helplessness, and those are the times when something like relaxing makes sense. But that's only part of what I experience. And the other part of our lives have to do with those many, many times when we actually can do something about something and should do something about it. And in that case, we should not relax. We should get busy. We should work hard. We should strive. I mean, in one way, this is a really great sort of formula for living a kind of a happy life. I'm not sure it's a formula for raising kids. Relax. Oh, you got an F? Oh, relax. It's all right. Don't worry about it. Dad's fine with it. Oh, you never gonna get a job? Oh, relax. We'll take care of you. Amida loves you. So that's the kind of the downside. And I know you don't mean that. I know you don't mean that, because you did say that what it removes is the fear of failure, so that we can work hard, so that we can strive to be moral. So I know you don't mean that, but put in this way, it kind of emphasizes a part of what we experience. And it doesn't quite address, the other parts of what we experience in our life, mainly all those many times when we really do have to do something about a particular situation. There are times when you do not want to trust certain people. Absolutely. I can think of several right now running for office. So yeah, be trusting, On the other side is don't trust. Relax, great. On the other side, work hard. Fearlessness, well, there are things we should fear. And so, and particularly on the part of fearlessness, it's a kind of value that makes sense in those times when we are rational. Yes, I know, rationally. I shouldn't be afraid of whatever it is that I'm afraid of, because it's an irrational fear. That's what Omamodi's address, you know, irrational fears. Or I have my Omamori on my car because I might get into an accident. I haven't gotten into one yet, but I might get into an accident, you know. And the Shinshu guy can come and say, hey, relax, take it easy, you know, relax, just drive. But I still want my Omamori on the rear view mirror, you know, just in case. You know, because that's the other side of our lives, is that we are not rational. We are irrational, many, many times. And we have fears that we cannot control. And we need to somehow, you know, reach out for some kind of aid or some kind of help that will allow us to at least get by, you know, to manage those fears. So I think the formula that you laid out, you know, works fantastically for certain areas of our lives, but not all of the areas of our lives. And it's very positive in a way. Again, if I were to be a little more critical, kind of Pollyanna, you know, relax, trust, you know, be friendly, don't be afraid, you know, all those kind of things that we tell our kids, other people, our parents, ourselves. And we know that just affirming those values don't really address the kind of issues that we really face, in which we do face people that we don't trust. We are filled with all kinds of different fears, and we do have to put out all kinds of effort that really does not allow us and should not allow us to relax. And so I think about, and I'm just going to end on this, I think about the Christian theologian and political theorist Reinhold Niebuhr, who wrote a very interesting book called The Children of Light and the Children of Darkness. And the children of light are the ones who see, you know, life as very positive. You know, they trust, they don't fear, you know, kind of pretty much all of the values that you were describing as Shinshu values. And of course, he was a very hard-nosed political theorist as well, and looking at and really going through and coming out of the Second World War and having to face questions like, what do you do with a Hitler? What do you do with an Imperial Japan? The question in our time is, what do you do with terrorists? And relax, trust, fearlessness don't work. And so the analysis that Niebuhr did was to say that if you're too much a child of light, you know, too much affirming all the kind of positive values, that there are children of darkness out there that are just going to run you over. They're going to take over. And the only way to stop these forces of darkness is to use the forces of darkness. And so you meet force with force. You meet attack with a counterattack. You know, it's not going to work to just be trusting and friendly and kind when oftentimes we have to do the other. So it's complicated, and again, I know you know you're totally aware of the complications of life, especially since you become a parent, and so you know all of these sides is good, but I would like to hear about a Shinshu value of how you deal with terrorists, of how you deal with people you don't trust or shouldn't trust, of how you deal with overwhelming force that is coming against you, and you don't want to say, well, I can't do anything about it, so I'll just trust Amida. You know, what is the Shinshu value for dealing with evil? Evil exists. all of the values here, works in a kind of a world in which there isn't much evil, but in a world of evil and all kinds of forces out there that are out to destroy you or to do you harm. How do you deal with forces like that? And I don't mean just on a global political way, but even in our everyday lives. How do I deal with my neighbor, who I know is stealing from me? I'm not going to trust him. I can't trust him. I wish I could, but I can't. What do I do? What would the Shinshu response be? So let me just stop there.
All right. Well, very good. Thank you for your response there. Yeah. Let me see how to attack this directly. Yeah, but the thing is that I don't. What I don't mean is, I'm not saying that you necessarily trust specific other individuals. Shinran certainly never said anything like that. Shinran didn't even trust himself. He certainly didn't necessarily trust other people that he met. He knew people could be rather nasty. I mean, he experienced more hardship than probably most of us have ever had to experience in our lives. This is a man who was exiled, and exile was intended as a type of soft execution. The intention was that he would be sent into the provinces as a monk, cut off from his ability to draw alms and this sort of stuff, and that he would die. I mean, they were trying to kill him by sending him into exile. He experienced many years of hardship without good communal support off in the provinces. He faced possible violence at times, this sort of thing. So he knew that you couldn't necessarily trust people. You couldn't even trust the emperor, to do the right thing. And he criticizes the emperor directly in his writings, and he criticizes other people, eminent monks. He knew what people were like, and he knew what he himself was like. So I certainly don't mean trust your next door neighbor, no matter, even though he seems like a shady character, even though you're pretty sure you saw him, stealing stuff out of your garage, even though you looked him up on the internet and, it looks like he has a criminal record, keep trusting him, keep trusting him. That's of course not the kind of trust that Shinran recommends, and that's not the sort of trust that I'm talking about here. Relaxing, that's another thing that was brought up too, right? I feel kind of funny actually, being here, counseling the Hawaiians to relax while I'm here all day long in my suit and jacket and everything. Who's the relaxed person here? But relaxing doesn't mean that you do nothing, and relaxing doesn't mean that you don't have standards or things like that. So this idea that it would make parenting hard, that's again not the type of relaxing that I'm talking about. I do think that this actually does apply directly to parenting, and the reason I feel that is because it's my wife who tells me that she tries to apply this sort of thing. We've got a 3.5-year-old. That kid is a terror, right? I mean, he won't take no for an answer. He runs around, he makes noise, he breaks everything that he comes within 5 feet of. He's, in other words, a normal 3-year-old. So, my wife is also a stay-at-home mom, so she's with him all day long. And she gets very frustrated in this sort of situation. But the situation for her, when her frustration level reaches maximum, and she's afraid she's going to snap and belt the kid or something like that, she relaxes, and that's what allows her to go back to work. And that's the way I understand things too. Not to toot my own horn, but I'm probably the hardest working person that I know. I think I can say that objectively. I have written 3 books in the last 2 years, published a bunch of articles during that time, run a full complement of courses at the PhD, MA, and undergraduate level, teach online adjuncting for the Graduate Theological Union. I'm the graduate officer. I advise students. I'm going constantly to a bunch of committee meetings. I meanwhile have a wife. I have 2 children. I have a whole family to manage. I have my own projects. I'm doing stuff at the temple. I'm crazy busy. And the thing is, I'm fairly productive. I'm doing lots of things, and I'm getting all those things done. So I'm not relaxed in a way that says relax, and that means sit on the couch, pop open a beer, and watch the Cowboys game, right? What I am is relaxed in the midst of activity. So that's maybe another thing that should be clarified here, and that's why your comments are very helpful. They allow me to clarify possible misunderstandings of what I mean here. Buddhism is about skillful means, and skillful means is about responding appropriately to whatever the given situation is, and situations are always different. So there's times when relaxing has the appearance of putting on your swimsuit and going down to the beach and sitting in the sand and hanging out with a paperback, and that's legitimate relaxing at times. And there's times when relaxing is taking a breath, taking a moment, and rolling your sleeves up and getting to work too, you know? And there's a lot of other ways that relaxing can be too. Relaxing isn't about specific actions, it's about an attitude, a relaxed attitude in the midst of life, including in the midst sometimes of turmoil and difficulty and hard work and these sort of things. So I don't want to paint it in that sort of Pollyannish way, which I think you're right, that there's a danger of it being interpreted that way when I just sort of initially presented this way. In terms of fear, yes, we do need to be certainly cautious about things in this world. I lived in New York City for years. I left in 2001 before the attacks happened. But I, continued to have many friends and people important to me there. So I was very concerned during that time period. I was actually supposed to fly to New York that weekend, and I wasn't able to do so because all air travel was grounded. I'm actually a person who's afraid of flying in the first place. Statistically, you're not likely to die in a plane crash, but it's certainly a possibility, and about 1,500 people in the U.S. die every year in plane crashes. And the fact that I know that proves that I'm somewhat afraid of flying. Okay, but even though I was certainly putting myself at risk, I was able to put that fear aside and fly 11 hours, over the ocean here to be with everyone here. This is not to say I'm a truly fearless person. That's not at all true. What I'm saying is that in the midst of us indeed having fears and indeed having reasons for being fearful, and in the midst of us working hard and getting stressed out and needing to relax and everything, we apply these sort of attitudes to the situations we actually have. I think that's the important thing. So when my fear begins to rise to an unreasonable level, I remind myself, no, be fearless. That's the better way to be. And when my anxiety or my stress reaches a level which is unmanageable, I tell myself, no, wait, relax, trust in the situation. And that lets me get back to work and these sort of things. So these are not meant to be pie in the sky sort of solutions, but are things to be applied in our everyday life. In terms of the irrational, which you brought up, I actually got my start as a fiction writer, and the irrational and the imaginative is what someone who writes fiction works with. So this is something that's still quite important to me. I'm also, as I mentioned, someone who grew up with a lot of ghost stories, and I know well the difference between the rational, let's call it the daylight brain, and the irrational, nighttime brain. That we have both of these in us, and we can't really get rid of them. This is what we are like, right? So, for example, I grew up with lots and lots of ghost stories, and I'm actually a fairly scientific person, and here today with all of you in the room with me and the light on and everything, I can say I don't believe in ghosts. I don't think they exist, period. I think it's superstition. But on the other hand, maybe some of you have been to the Honganji International Center in Kyoto. It's near Nishi Honganji, and people can stay there if they're going to Japan from overseas. Anyways, I've spent months and months of my life living in this place. And if you ever go there, to get to the washroom, the bathroom's at the end of this long hallway. And at night, everyone from the office goes home. And you're sometimes the only person in this building, alone in Japan. They turn the lights off. It's really dark, actually. There's just these kind of faint green lights that shine in the hallway. Actually, they make everything look spookier than if there was no light, probably. Okay? And they always put me in the room closest to the stairs. So I'm the furthest away from the bathroom, always, without fail. Okay? So I spent all this time staying there. And at night, you know, it is so scary to have to go down that hallway, to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. And you know, during the day, I never think anything about it, and I'm fearless, and I'm brave, and I'm scientific, and I'm rational. And then at night, when everyone goes home, and that place is really spooky and dark and everything, I'm afraid of ghosts at that point, for real. You know, I always look down the hallway, and if you've ever seen Ringu, you know, the Ring, you know, this movie from Japan about this creepy ghost girl. She's got the long black hair, super scary, okay. I always will open my door and look out and be sure that I'm gonna see that ghost girl at the end of the hallway looking back at me. And that's the worst part of the whole movie. She doesn't actually grab you and like twist your head off or something. She just looks at you and she's so scared you die of fright. That's how it's, you know, it's effectively conveyed, you know, in this movie. So I'm always afraid I'm gonna see her. That's what I'm afraid. I'm not afraid she's gonna grab me. I'm just afraid she's gonna be there, okay? So I honestly, for real, and this is quite embarrassing to say, I'm always afraid that I will see this girl. That's a movie anyways, it's made up, right? And there's no such thing as ghosts, but I am legitimately afraid. If I didn't have Shinran to tell me, you know, you are protected, even if it, you know, even the irrational parts of you are okay, and you don't have anything to be afraid of. There's no ghosts and everything. If I didn't have that teaching that I could just kind of tell myself, I would never go to the bathroom in Japan. So I would have died of, you know, I don't know, some sort of bladder problem years ago if there wasn't this sort of thing. So I'm well aware of how irrational we are. In terms of this very interesting thing about the children of light and the children of darkness, yeah, I'm very aware of this as well. You know, there's plenty of bad people out there, or at least there's plenty of people who do bad things, really bad things. Many of us have probably encountered some of them in some fashion in our lives. And if we are lucky not to have really rubbed up against human evil, we at least are aware of it. You know, I mean, we've at least all heard of Hitler, right? I grew up on this side of the Vietnam War, so I have to say all of that stuff is in a history book for me. I know some people actually lived through this stuff, but we have clear examples of ultimate evil. Nowadays, you know, we have Osama bin Laden and people like that. There's always evil people that we can point to. So certainly there are these very dangerous people out there. And even more to the point, I know that there are children of darkness because I feel that I am one of them. I don't think that I am a child of light. I'm pretty sure that I am myself a child of darkness. When I look into myself, I find that I have a real capacity to do things that I would really not wish to do. And the only reason that I don't do these things is not because I'm any good at all. It's really because of circumstances that have allowed me to not be in a position where I needed to be acting on these sort of impulses. I always go back to what Shinran says in the Tani show, where he asks his follower, Yue Bo. He says, Yue, you're my follower, right? You'll do whatever I say. I'm your master, right? And Yue says, yes, of course, Master Shinran. I'd do anything you say. And Shinran says to him, Yue, if I told you to kill 1,000 people because that's how you would get into the Pure Land, you'd do it, right? And Yue has to stop, and he pauses and he says, you know, I just said I would kill 1,000 people, but I find I can't even kill one person. And Shinran says, yes, that's true, but it's because your karmic circumstances at this time are such that you're not going to kill anyone. You can't even kill one person. But if your karmic circumstances change and it becomes necessary for you, you would kill 1,000 people, and I would kill 1,000 people too. So this is always the way I think of it, is that I am a child of darkness who is currently enabled, not through my own power, but through others, not to have to kill people, something I don't want to do. But I do know that I am certainly capable of it. Again, when I think of children of darkness, I have to think of my own family, quite frankly. I don't think of bad people as other people, but I think of them as my own ancestors. You know, my great-great-grandfather was a slave owner in the South. You know, a very sort of horrible thing who owned and abused other human beings. And he fought in the Civil War as a Confederate. My family is Southern from hundreds of years back, before there really was a South. he fought in order to keep the right to deny other people their rights for his own benefit. And of course, he was on the losing side of the war. So then his son, my great-grandfather, he couldn't own slaves, but he joined the Ku Klux Klan. He was a Klan member. And so he went about in the night, terrorizing people, victimizing them in this way. So very much children of darkness. And then, my grandfather, he was not a Klan member, and I guess a Klan member is better than a slave owner. So my grandfather was neither a slave owner or a Klan member, but he employed African Americans on his farm. He had a very paternalistic attitudes towards them. So he tried to be nice, but there was a very clear separation between himself and the blacks that he employed. This was, of course, a time of legal segregation in the South. And so he was certainly not stainless himself. And then I think of my father, who wasn't a slave owner or a Klan member or really paternalistic in that way either. He's a baby boomer, he's a child of the 60s, graduated from Southern Methodist University in 1968 in Dallas, and moved to the north in order to get away from those sort of things. So I can see these children of light over time, it's children of darkness rather, getting a little better. But what's changing here is not necessarily that my father's actually better than my grandfather, or my grandfather's better than my great-grandfather, or that he was better than my great-great-grandfather, or that I'm better than any of them. It's that they all lived in different circumstances from each other and from me. If I, a white person in the Wilson family, had been born 200 years ago, right now, if this was 200 years ago, I would own slaves. I would be that person. I would be that sort of person that I really abhor. And if I'd been born 100 years ago in Texas, where my family was, I would be a Klan member, most likely. Because, goodness knows most of my family were. That was normal for them. So, my father had the advantage of growing up after legal segregation and growing up in a time when people were moving away towards better possibilities. Such that now in my life, I've had black bosses, I've dated black women, I have a black president, and all of these things seem okay to me. Things that would have been the definition of evil for just a few generations back in my own family. So I know the difference is not anything inherent. I have the same genes. I even have the same name as these people. I am a child of darkness. I'm just allowed to not have to express it in this way. This is also the way that I think of Osama bin Laden, and also the way I think of Hitler and others as well. They are bad people. They're doing bad things. They did do bad things. And they sometimes have to be met with force if that's the only way they can prevent suffering from being spread by people. But at the end of the day, there's only really, at least so far as I know, children of darkness. This is what Shin Buddhism tells me. The sort of Christianity that, was it Niebuhr? That Niebuhr had told him there were children of light and that he was one of them, and there were children of darkness, and they were things he had to resist as a children of light. But Shin Buddhism, as I understand it, tells me that all of us are endarkened, and that the light nonetheless shines on us from outside of us. And so at the end of the day, of course we have to meet difficult situations with force. But we can also recognize that every time we do that, it on some level represents a failing of ourselves as well as those other people, because we didn't find a better way. And ultimately, reconciliation of all beings is the vision of Jodo Shinshu. That's what the Pure Land is about. All beings are born there. Even Osama bin Laden, even Hitler, even my great-grandfather, all beings. It's a very, as you can see, sort of an emotional point for me. This is why I talk about Shin as being an emotional sort of Buddhism. When I was practicing Zen, this sort of thing would have been seen very much as a weakness to get choked up over something, but I can be natural in this sort of setting. So I'm not trying to paint a Pollyanna sort of picture here. Things are very bad, and we ourselves may be very bad. Relaxing, trusting, and thanking are actually sometimes very, very difficult practices that we try to employ in a very difficult sort of world. And fearlessness is something that we try to put into practice sometimes in very fearful situations. So I think that the matter is to apply them appropriately. You know, I mentioned, for example, global warming, that we've got to be aware of this sort of thing. I think climate change is clearly going on, just based on the scientific evidence. We need to be aware of this. We should be afraid of what may happen there. But if we focus always on our fear that we won't be able to find a solution, that there is no way to stop multinational corporations that are contributing to the sort of pollution that we face, the fear that it's always just all going to go to hell in a handbasket, we won't be able to actually move forward and do the sort of actions that are within our potentiality. So fear, I think, is something that we can put aside in favor instead of hope, because I think hope is a much more Shin sort of Buddhist value. So when I encounter problems, I try to be hopeful about how we may be able to find a solution and work to accomplish that, instead of being afraid of always, there is no solution and there's no way I can get through it and I'm just stuck in that sort of way. Because certainly many messages I receive from the media and other things try to stick me, you know, often for the benefit of others. Because people who are frozen in fear in that way are also people who are very passive and able to be manipulated. So I think of fearlessness as actually the way of being active. And I think of people who are able to relax and trust that there is something good and a way to achieve it as being the people who move forward and get things done in this world. So thank you for allowing me then to try to clarify these sort of values for me. Very useful.
I think everybody will, as you can tell from the applause, I think everybody will agree with me that that is one of the most eloquent, moving statements I have ever heard for a long, long time. Thank you.
I think we still have some time, don't we? We can probably take some questions. Okay, great. One right there.
I've been taught that one of the mainstays of Shin Buddhism is self-reflection and gratitude. I've always heard those together. And I think we live in a very psychological age, and this might be a quality that would be very appealing to the culture at large. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on this tradition of self-reflection.
Sure. Yeah, self-reflection is something that's very important. We say that we don't meditate, like don't do silent, you know, seated meditation in the lotus position, this sort of thing in Buddhism, but in Shin Buddhism. But we certainly do meditate in a way, and our form of meditation often is self-reflection. Again, I feel like I keep quoting Shinran all day. Maybe I sound like a broken record, but he really is very important to me. When you read his writings, he has this phrase he says over and over again. He says, when I reflect within myself, or maybe we would translate, when I reflect upon myself, something like this. When I reflect within myself. So his teachings are coming out of deep reflection into his own nature, discovering it, discovering its bad sides, and discovering, you know, that he has been embraced, discovering that he can trust in that way, and that even a being who feels on some level that he's worthless, that actually he can be transformed and become a power for very positive good, bringing the Shin message to the people of Japan, reflecting himself, discovering these things. That's a you know, very important practice for him, if we want to call it a practice. And so I think that's certainly something that we can do in our lives. Certainly that's part of where my talks here today come from, is reflecting within myself. So if that's something that can resonate with other people outside of the temples as well, then that's great. Maybe that's something we want to be talking to others about. That's a very good suggestion. I'll say that there is a type of self-focus that tends to be narcissistic in American society as well. Sometimes we reflect upon ourselves and it's kind of self-aggrandizing the whole time. And that can be very unfortunate. Not to stereotype people too much, but I lived in California for a couple of years in Los Angeles, and they're very good at self-reflection of a type, all right? That's not quite the same self-reflection I'm talking about here. But an honest sort of open reflection. This is also, I think, why we talk about hearing the Dharma in Shin Buddhism as well. If we're open to the Dharma and hear it, really hearing the Dharma, as I understand it, is not about hearing specific doctrines about Amida and things up on an altar or anything like that. Hearing the Dharma, being receptive to it, having it enter your ears, into your mind, it's filtering into you, into your life, into your body, into your experience. And so hearing the Dharma is the counterpart that goes with then self-reflection that brings about the transformative experience in Jodo Shinshu, brings about that trusting. Shinjin, that term we have, you said I should definitely avoid words like that. So how would I translate this then? When I use a word like Shinjin, when I translate it, and I prefer to often translate it, I use the term trusting heart, as a matter of fact. And then I try to then demonstrate in context what I mean by that. I think if we are going to, this is my aside here, but if we're just going to say, oh, you can't translate, you can't understand it, you're just not going to have any traction with that sort of thing. You've got to put it into words that people can try to understand. And even if you lose something when you translate it, well, get the rest of it back through context, that sort of thing. But you have to go forward. Now I'm totally off on my rant instead of your question, so I apologize for that. Was there something that you wanted to add about self-reflection in American culture? I thought that was a good issue to raise.
No, it's been an extremely important part of this tradition for me, but you expressed it very well, so thank you.
Oh, thank you. Do we have other questions? A couple over here.
One of the things that attracted me to coming to the temple was this.
I think it may have been turned off. Talk right into it.
Well, was this a motto that used to be on the Sunday paper advertising the church schedule? It would say, "Come as you are." Mm. And in the back of my mind, I always thought of Groucho Marx, who said, "I don't want to join any organization that wants me as a member."
Right.
But as you come to the temple, just the way you are, you've come across teachers, situations, and words and resources that teach you that you're okay as you are, but there are ways to go deeper and wider into yourself. And I think that's what you were talking about, trust, loyalty, whatever. Come as you are, and even those qualities are something that can be deeper and more meaningful as you gain in spiritual maturity. And that's what Shin Buddhism is for me.
Well, great, thank you. I don't have anything to add. That's a great comment.
Sensei, I know there's no such thing as stupid questions in this session, but
people always take it as a challenge too.
If we are going to reach out to other non-Buddhists, my question is: do you believe in a literal Pure Land?
An excellent question. The question is, do I believe in a literal Pure Land? The answer to that is that I don't really have a firm belief in a literal Pure Land or a firm belief in a non-literal Pure Land. As far as I understand it, my approach is to let go and to trust. So I don't know what happens after I die. I do know that I die. I'm pretty sure I've got that part right, okay? But afterwards, I don't know for sure what will happen. It's impossible for me to know. I can trust, I can believe, okay, in this sort of thing, but I can't really know. And I'm the sort of person who, when I can't know, I kind of let things be, all right? So there are two possibilities as far as I'm concerned, based on my experiences. It may be that there is no literal Pure Land. It may be that there is nothing, in fact, and that when you die, maybe, game over, the TV set fades to black and, you've done your time. Maybe that's true. I can't tell you for sure because so far as I can tell, I'm not currently dead, all right? So if that's what happens, then I guess that's the way it's meant to be and I'll be okay with it. Another possibility, though, is, of course, that there is something. And as I understand things, that something is going to be positive. Perhaps it'll be a literal Pure Land. There may be trees of a certain height made out of jewels. There may be ponds with jeweled steps going down into them, with water with, 7 qualities, if I remember correctly. And there may be a lotus that will open, and there I'll be. That'd be kind of cool. Absolutely. I wouldn't say no. Maybe it'll be something else, but something good. Because certainly those very literalistic images in the Pure Land Sutras are conveying to us the idea of something beautiful, something wonderful, something blissful. So whether it's blissful because I get to sit on a lotus, or blissful because I've merged with reality, or blissful in some other way that is hard for me to even express or to understand now, I understand that it'll be something positive. So I just let it be whatever it will be. For me, I really do focus on this life and how I am now. So I trust in this life that I am embraced and that I am benefited in this life. And I trust in this life that whatever happens after I die, that it's taken care of. So I have to say, I don't even really think about it very often. So a belief in a literal Pure Land or something is not a strong component of my approach, simply because it doesn't come up for me very often. I have absolutely no doubt that it's taken care of. So whatever that is, I'm just going to let it be whatever it is. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
If my recollection is correct, you use the word Amida,
Yeah.
just on a few occasions.
Right? Yeah.
Can I ask you, how do you tie Amida to your talk so far? I'm not so sure. Or maybe you ought to preface that. What would be your best description, definition of Amida?
Okay.
And how does it fit into this whole idea of trusting in your talk?
An excellent question. I can't pretend that I necessarily have a very systematic answer to give you. At the end of the day, I'm not a minister or a theologian or anything like that. I do happen to have a doctorate in religious studies, and I teach Buddhism in the academic classroom, but I'm very much actually a layperson. And so I try to understand these things just in my own life and try to understand them as they seem relevant to me. I'm not certain that this all holds together or that it would be logical if you laid it all out. I'm trying to more convey how I live as a Shin Buddhist and what are the things that inform that life. Since, again, as a layperson, I'm only systematic to the degree that when people tell me to give a talk, I have to say something, right? Most of the day, I'm really just kind of living this out. In terms, then, of trying to talk about what Amida is, one of the problems with talking about Amida is that Shinran talks about Amida in many different ways. So Shinran doesn't say, this is what Amida is. Shinran says, this is what, and that is what, and this other thing, okay? So he has multiple ways of talking about it. And I think the reason for that is that one way that Shinran often, very often, talks about Amida is as inconceivable. He says that Amida is inconceivable. The Pure Land also is portrayed as being inconceivable ultimately. And this is one reason why literal or non-literal ideas, both of them in a way are sort of a dead end, quite possibly. Amida is inconceivable to us in our current situation. If we could really conceive of Amida, that would mean that we could really understand that. If we could really understand that, we would be Buddhas. That's what that means, okay? So we cannot truly understand ultimate reality. Ultimate reality in its liberated, awakened aspect, that is what Amida is, right? Amida talks about two types of Amida, Shinran talks about Amida, two types of Amida. The Amida of ultimate reality, Dharmakaya Amida, and the Amida of compassion, Amida for us, basically. The Amida that emerges out of that ultimate reality and comes towards us into a form, into a conception, so that we can begin to interact with it, be aware of it, and move towards it in that way. Both of these are legitimate Amidas from Shinran's standpoint. But ultimately, he says, Amida is without form, is without color, you know, is beyond any conception that we can try to put onto it. So there's no way that I could ever describe this fully. It is not possible for me to do. That said, in Zen Buddhism, the method is to try to get rid of all conceptions. Once your mind is completely eliminated, the conceptions and the dualisms and everything, you'll experience ultimate reality. So they're always trying to yank the rug out from underneath you, which is a very difficult path, but you know, a very noble one as well. Shin Buddhism is basically the opposite. Shin Buddhism says, we are foolish beings who can only approach the inconceivable through concepts. That's the only way that we can begin to get a hold on this. And that's why we have the Pure Land. That's why we have Amida in form, in order to teach us about formless Amida. These are all things that are in Shinran. It's a bit of my own words, but these are the concepts that are there. So if we had to then put it succinctly, we would say Amida is ultimate reality, and that ultimate reality has qualities of compassion that come towards us. And we would also say that Amida is a form, and Amida is a story, and Amida is a tradition that's been passed down to us that tells us about Dharmakara Bodhisattva, the 48 vows, and all of that traditional imagery that assists us in understanding that great Amida, that great compassion that does embrace us. Elsewhere, Shinran often talks about Amida as boundless light shining throughout the entire universe. So even everything I just said, there's another example, something else, right? It's very hard to ever succinctly put it, because if we could, it would mean we understood it. You can never understand the inconceivable. That's what the word kind of means, okay? I'm sorry if it seems like maybe that's like a way to wiggle out of it, but that's not what I mean at all. This is something that I experience in my life, and I do experience that. And so I let it be whatever it is. Sometimes when I think about Amida, I think about, well, we don't have one in here, but maybe in the Hondo, I think about maybe like a person almost, like with arms and legs on a cloud or something. I think of Amida sometimes that way, and I feel like, you know, a child in the palm of the Buddha, you know, as it's put sometimes. Sometimes I think of Amida as being like light that shines on me, even though I am in the dark. Sometimes I think of Namu Amida Butsu as Amida, and so when I say the Nimbutsu, I think of myself as chanting Amida at that time. I let Amida be all those things, because Amida is beyond the ability of any of those things to capture what that means. For me, at least, I appreciate that flexibility. I consider that one of the strengths of the tradition. But that's my answer. I don't know if it would work for you. We're not out of time, are we, or are we? Can we take another question? Okay, great. Did I just exhaust everyone's patience finally with that one? Okay, here's one more.
I'm not sure who brought you here. I think maybe Dr. Bloom, and you did a great choice. You did a marvelous job, and I thank you.
Thank you very much.
Very
I
moving.
appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, I guess, oh, I thought we were going to get away.
Would it have to be the Buddha that you would be praying to in order to achieve a realization? Could you use something else, maybe like Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy, and put all your energy and sincerity into this figure to achieve the same results?
That's a very good question. I'm not certain that specifically Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy would work, because these are traditionally fairly small concepts, right? There's concepts and there's concepts. Amida is a concept of something that is enormous, that is the size of the entire universe, that is light shining in every quarter, in every corner. You know, this is something very large and profound. Santa Claus is a concept of a fat dude in a red suit who lives on the North Pole and has flying reindeer, right? And the Tooth Fairy is a concept of, like, I don't know, at least in my understanding, it's like, you know, a little fairy, so it's like a woman in a dress with some butterfly wings who likes to steal your molars, okay? So If you have an expansive enough understanding of the Tooth Fairy, or maybe in particular of Santa Claus, who is boundlessly generous, right? Except for the old traditions of Santa Claus, who leaves you coal and maybe even does bad things to you if you've been bad. If you have an expansive enough understanding of those things, maybe. It wouldn't work for me, but I don't know. Everybody's different. I will say, though, that I understand this through Buddhism, and so for me, that's the right way, and I do personally believe it to be probably the most accurate way. If I didn't feel that way, I wouldn't be involved in this out of the many sort of religious options I have. But it isn't necessarily the only way. So, for example, I talked about God earlier in my talk. I talked about certain conceptions of God that instill people with fear and that hold them back, that are used to control them or to exploit them and that sort of thing. God is a concept that has done enormous damage historically. But at the same time, God is also a concept that has been used to do enormous good in this world. And it is possible to have conceptions of God that are not that angry, jealous, sort of petty person that I was talking about before, but a real God with truly divine sort of characteristics. A sort of being who has love and not judgment, because this is one of the main differences between Amida and God is often portrayed in the Christian tradition, that there's not a judgmentalism. There's no judging of the dead at the end of time and this sort of stuff. Amida doesn't create hell. Amida is the solution to hell, this sort of thing. Amida closes off the three lower worlds, they say. So if you have a conception of God which is expansive, which is compassionate and joyful and helpful in that sort of way, it would probably, I think, be possible to go in that direction. So that's something that would be possible. Again, I think Tooth Fairy is probably too limited a concept. But God is a very big concept, right? And to the extent that there's a reality there that's pointed at by the concept, that God then would be definitely something you could trust in. Or it could be inner light, or there's all sorts of possibilities in different religious traditions. For me, though, it's Amida Buddha. It's other power. This is what I've experienced. But I leave it up to others to define those things for themselves. Yeah.
Just in very practical terms now, do you have any suggestions as to what, being familiar with what's happening in Canada and maybe some being familiar with the churches of America and having some contact with some of our temples in Japan, what practical things could we do in our temples to attract and show value to parents, young parents with children, so the temple has meaning for their lives? They're busy, they're earning a living, they're trying to raise children. We compete with sports schedules, What practical things could we offer to show value in our temples and bring new people into our temple?
That's an excellent question. And I may not necessarily have very good solutions. Like I said, I'm a scholar and a layperson, not a minister. So the actual nuts and bolts of running a temple are things that I don't pretend to have a very sophisticated understanding of. That said, I can at least think of my own situation as a young parent. We started going to the Unitarian Universalist Church a couple years ago after we moved to Canada. There wasn't a temple nearby, and so we had to choose from what resources we had. And I wasn't sure if I was going to be satisfied going to that church, but what kept us, among other things, again, in this demographic of being young parents, is they had childcare for, at that time, our toddler son, who was just crawling when we first went there. They had childcare as he got bigger, was a preschooler, but still little. They have childcare for him. So among other things, we're worn out by that kid. So if I can stick him in the nursery for 1 hour a week, My wife and I are fine to sit through the most boring sermon that guy can deliver. Actually, it's a woman, but you know what I mean, right? Okay? So to get that hour or hour and a half of relief, not daddy, 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 you know, the whole time pulling on my pants leg, ugh. So that's nice, okay? So childcare is good, and of course as he gets older, now he's transitioning into the church school, and they're teaching him very simple spiritual lessons, and they're very non-dogmatic. They help you actually to develop your critical thinking, and these are the Unitarians after all. So I really appreciate that. That's really nice. So having that childcare is very good. There's no way you can necessarily help this, but having other people like me at the church made it more likely I was going to stay, right? So the fact that we did make a core group of friends who were other young parents, and that the church actively supported us hanging out, basically, and talking with each other, that helped. And they had a play group so that my wife could go on Tuesday morning. She still does this, and the kids could all play together in the church playroom, while the mommies hung around and swapped notes about how annoying kids are, right? And so that was really bonding for them, and now they're really good friends, my wife and these other people. So that was really good. And then another part of it, I would say, is something that the Unitarian Universalists do, is they came out of Protestant Christianity, so that does still model somewhat their services. Of course, our models are fairly Protestant as well, right? In a way that they aren't in Japan. One thing they have is, that I like, is they have a professional minister, and she's great, and she gives good sermons. But they have a lot of lay people also who talk about religion in their own lives from their own different experiences and perspectives. And they have really good music, including more contemporary music. Like, we sing all sorts of hymns and songs. They have like a kind of like a jazz band and everything that can play and all these sort of things. I just don't know how much of this will ever go over at a Jodo Shinshu temple, even the most liberal one, right? But the truth of the matter is, it's fun to go to that church. It's fun. You come out of there, you feel energized, good music, you're clapping your hands, you're singing. And I gotta say, there's no God talk in this church. It's not that type of church. These are Unitarians. They believe in, at most, one God, okay? That's what makes them Unitarian. Many of them are atheists, actually. But they're nonetheless sort of spiritual people who gather together to support each other on their own religious journeys there. So just the fact that they can change things up, they can have ministers and they can have lay people. We get plenty of traditional music, they get contemporary music, and they have good musicians. They even hire them sometimes. That they'll do different sort of services. It's really, it's healthy. It's very healthy that they do that sort of thing. Again, I don't know, because we're fairly liturgically oriented, I don't know that we would ever get there. But it brings in young people who find it fun to go to church, and they're not turned off by it. And of course, it's all in English, so they always understand everything that goes on. And that's very helpful too. So I'm sorry, those are not very helpful comments, but at least that's why we go to that church. That's what I can say.